All right, so ideology in RPG. Okay, so Jason is back on YouTube, and he mentioned something that's stroke a chord with me this week or last week in some of his podcast, and it's like the idea that when we read rules, when we read a new game, when we learn a new game, there might be different ways to learn it. And he was, talking about how sometimes a game is written in such a way that it's open for interpretation, and then when it's open for interpretation, what I see, and this is not what he's saying, but it's what I want to go for, is that this is where ideology comes in. So let me give you a good example. So when we played, when we were ready for Circle of Hands, Ivan, Eloy, Runeslinger, and I read the book, and we had our session 0, and I had some questions. I was like, how we go about this? How we go about that? Because the book was not covering it completely. So it was mentioning a few things, and it was like open for interpretation. And so there's a video about this conversation online. I think Runeslinger was absent. It was just Eloy, and it was an impromptu conversation. And you can see this whole thing there. And so what happened is that we discussed, we tried. So we were looking for, I remember Ivan and I were just going through the lines, like sentence by sentence, finding like quotes, and I was like, he's mentioning this here, he's mentioning that there. And this is what we have to do when we reach such a level of trying to understand the game. I mean, when it's a part of it is open for interpretation, you're trying to find justification. Sometimes it's later in the book, and you read it later in the book, and you're like, okay, that makes sense. Okay, so and there was a few of those, and so open discussions. And then what happened is that since the book was not clear enough, covering enough, that we didn't agree on the reading. We didn't agree on the interpretation. So I'm going to come back to this later. What happens when you read something and it's open for interpretation? So, like scholars do that all the time. It's called the hermeneutics circle. You can Google that. And because what happens is that when you read Plato, or when you read Nietzsche or Schopenhauer or whoever, Freud or anything, guys are dead, so they cannot tell you what they want it to mean, right? So what you need to do is you need to read, take classes, and make sense out of what is being said there. And the problem is that, so that's one thing, like what the guy was trying to say, what the writer, meant. But that's not the same thing. Listen to this. That's not what the writer meant, or what the writer was trying to say is not the same thing that what means what is written. It's not the same thing that the meaning of what is written black on white. There's a difference between the intention of the author, the writer, and what means what is written. What's the meaning of the text. So all right, so that's one thing. In RPG, what's interesting is that some of the guys, the designers, are still alive, so you can ask. So I was talking with Runeslinger, and what Runeslinger kind of like communicated to me is that Ron Edwards, the author of Circle of Hands, kind of like acknowledged that they're doing it right. So he was kind of like on board with their interpretation. you know, instead of mine, you know. And so that's one thing. That's fine. But this is why Jason struck a chord with me. Jason said in one of his videos, he said, I don't care what the author, how the author played the game, because there is a word in French, I don't know if it's the same in English, it's pérennité. Pérennité is like the legacy, call that the legacy. And Jason is like, you know, when Ron Edwards is going to be dead, for example, and people will take his book and read it and trying to play the game, when they're going to read the parts that were problematic, that were open for interpretation, the way it was for us, at least for me, because it feels like it was not a problem for them, but at least for me, well, what they're going to do, the designer is not going to be there. So what they're going to do is they're going to apply their own ideology. And this is what I want to mean by ideology in RPGs. Like, for example, in the Art Circle event, they read, because I was asking questions, because it was not clear in the book, like who's narrating. For example, when you roll the dice, when you fail as a player, do you narrate the failure, or the GM narrates the failure? And when you succeed, does the GM narrate what you do and how you do it? Or, you know, and it was like this, you know, this kind of like interpretation of the text, and the text it was never clear about who's narrating and when. That was the biggest open up for interpretation part of the thing. And so me, I wanted to, before we started to play, I wanted to know, like, what's the limit of my narration? And so these guys comes from another generation, so they've been playing for a long time, and I haven't. So I have, you know, I don't have the same reflex, I don't have the same mentality when it comes to interpreting the rules. So me, I was like, okay, so if it's not clear how we narrate, we need to, in the social contract, address who's narrating, how much he narrates, and when and why, you know, and all that, and then come up with a method, because the book is not clear about that. All of them, 3 of these guys, and it seems like Ron Edwards has the same idea, is that, you know, GM narrates the outcomes of the dice, and like, there was a discussion with Moonslinger. It was like, okay, so you narrate as the player, you succeed, you throw an arrow, you narrate, you know, everything you do until the arrow leaves your bow. After that, GM narrates. You know, it comes down to this level, you know. So they were basically saying that GM narrates and player, you know, just narrate their body parts, kind of thing, and then the outcome fall on them. And me, I was like, I don't really like it. I feel like, you know, my intention is clear. I want to kill the deer with the bow, so I should be able to narrate, you know, how the arrow goes through the deer and everything. And then so it was like some kind of contention there. Nothing in the book addressed that at all. This is ideology. My way, my style, my taste, my beliefs, my biases, all that were expressing themselves. They were like, okay, so since the book doesn't address it, I'd like to do it that way. They don't come from the same era as I do. They've been gaming years and years and years, so the way they have a more traditionalist understanding of the relationship with the narration and the dice. This is the way I interpret they might gonna not agree with me on that one, so we'll see in the video response for the comment section. But they for them, they never felt, Eloy mentioned it clearly, he said, this is not the way I read it. And I was like, yeah, we read it differently. And so what we do about that? And this is ideology. You know, for example, you know, there is scholars today that has like a psychoanalytic reading of Nietzsche, or they have which is anachronistic actually, but some will do stuff like that, or they have a Marxist reading of economy, or they have I don't know, conservative reading of environmental issues, or they have a Christian reading of abortion, or they have, it's the same thing in RPG. It proposes rules, but it cannot be perfect. It cannot be a closed system. There's always going to be stuff that are not addressed, because we are not perfect, and games are not perfect. And so when there is spaces for interpretation, boom, ideology, styles, taste, biases comes in. So my reading, so whenever the book was clear, Circle of Events, I was willing to apply exactly what the book was saying. But this small part, there's another part in the book, for example, where you should be able, depending on your profession, to understand the objective world around you, without rolling the dice. For some like that, it's been a while, but it's like this idea that, if you're a farmer or a peasant, you know how to manipulate a fork, or where to find a fork in a barn, kind of thing. So you don't have to ask for a fork in a barn and stuff like that. So again, it was like, okay, so do we need to ask questions about that, or since my profession allow me to do so, can I just wing it as the player? So in the book, it was not super clear about that. So there was a sentence where should be allowed to do it, kind of thing. And so again, their interpretation was more like, no, should ask the GM. GM has final say, kind of thing, which is super traditional in my interpretation. And me, I was like more so, no, I don't want to waste time asking stuff. I don't want to ask permission. If I'm a scout, if my character is some kind of a hunter kind of guy, I want to be able to track and do the thing. And so there was this. So this is ideology. So this is just an example. So this is ideology. It's like, and RPG is full of it. It comes down to so many things. Like, for example, there is some people who really like to play raw. So for example, in that group, we all agreed that raw is the way to go. So that was our ideology. Some dude who like to homebrew things, create house rules, Well, whenever that would come to a loophole in this reading of the game, or a place where it's open for interpretation, well, what he would do is he would house rule it. If he doesn't like a part, he would house rule it. If there's if you feel like, so that's another ideology as well. And there's many of them. Some people lie. Some people think that hiding stuff from the players and lying and as the game master to adjudicate stuff is part of the hobby. Some other people think that lying is always immoral, so you should not, even in the context of play. This is ideology again. It's the way Runestinger mentioned it in his video, and it's really important to stress it out. It's a social hobby. We don't come from the same generations, so we don't see things the same way. We don't read rules the same way. We don't understand practices. We have different practices of play as well. So I think we should spend some time discussing about that in our conversation, because we kind of never really approached it in such a way. Like I don't have words. I mean, I didn't want to make a video about nomenclature. Like, I didn't want to come up with all conceptualization of ideologies. But for example, you have the raw advocate, you know, for you would have some you know, the OSR advocate that never plays, you know, story games, and then you will have the story games that kind of like look down and spit on the, you know, on the role players that utilize, you know, traditional systems, stuff like that. And you have all kinds of different layers as well, you know, because it's like in politics. You can be, for example, an environmentalist, you know, so it's an ideology about the environment, and then you can be a conservative at the same time, you know, some people, or you can be a conservative, gay, transgender guy, you know. You don't have to, you know, you can mix it up and everything. So it's kind of like the same thing that you have in role-playing games, where, you know, some people want more free form, you know, like I would say me, and some other people want more, you know, traditional structure of hierarchy, like, so, you know, GM authority, you know, and then players should just, you know, do their only what concerns them. And so it's like, it's and it's really, I think it's important to address that. I think that we should I feel, I don't know if there's essays out there of people trying to organize all the RPG ideologies, but if you guys know about some of those, let me know. If you understand what I'm trying to say, let me know. And again, thank you for watching, and yeah, talk to you soon. All right.